So with that, you got a working custom attribute directive, but we can fine tune that even a bit more. Right now, notice that we're setting it to green and the default is white, but we're hard coding this in here. Maybe we wanted to expose our directive to several places in our application, or we're building a third-party package for other people to use. Then we might want to offer an easy configurable way without having them to dive into our code, right? So it would be great if we could set the default color, white, as well as the hover color from outside. And we can do this using inputs, because property binding can be used on directives as well as it was able to, or as we could use it on components. So therefore, I will add first new import here, input, and then add input. And the first thing is I'll have my default color, which I will set to white by default, just so that I have a color under all circumstances. I'll duplicate this and I'll set my background or my highlight color. Highlight color. This is green by default. However, to the outside, I will name this highlight, and I will show you why I do this in a second. So with that, I got both colors set up, and this will of course be set to my default color by default. And then here I will also set it to the default color. However, when mousing over, I will set it to the highlight color. So with that, this is set up. Now, how do we configure it and why did I name this highlight to the outside? In the directives component template, highlight is currently attached like this, a normal attribute. However, now we're using property binding. And if I did not specify highlight here, if I remove that for a second, I would need to add my highlight color property binding to that element. Angular 2 figures out that this belongs to this directive here. And I would set it to, let's say, blue. And then I would also add another property binding to the default color. And to see a difference here too, I'll set this to red. And if I save this, you see that it's blue and red. However, upon loading, it wasn't red. And the fact that this was white at the beginning is because here I'm initializing it with white, and this happens before the bound properties are set. So I can change this behavior by not setting this equal here, and instead adding the onInit lifecycle hook, which is available for directives too, not only for components, and add ng onInit, and then set the background color equal to the default color. Because remember, onInit is only reached after all the bound properties have been initialized. So now if I save this and reload the page, you see it's red by default. Nonetheless, it should be clear why I added highlight here. If I declare this external name, I can now get rid of this first binding here and instead set my directive itself, which shares the same name, highlight, to that color. So that's really just a shortcut to have one less extra item here and to indicate, hey, this is the key feature of this directive, the background color. Therefore, it's bound directly to the directive name. Now, of course, I could also fix this by simply naming this highlight. Then I wouldn't need that alias here to the outside. But I think it's a better code if this is called highlight color since the other is called default color. But with that, I'm making sure that I'm having this, well, exposure of the directive name as a bindable property to the outside, and inside of the directive, I'm using this different property name. So with this now works again. As you can see, I'm overriding the hard-coded defaults of white and green with the defaults I set when setting up or when using this directive in my template code. So that were the attribute directive. Time to move on to the structural directives.